we've got former mayor of Calgary, Naheed Nenshi, entering the race. And I always kind of thought the guy was a federal liberal. I never actually thought that he would ever go away. And I think I was right about that. But you've got a lot to say about Naheed Nenshi, because I think you kept a careful encyclopedia of everything he did wrong in Calgary. So give us the rundown on Naheed Nenshi, please.
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing is, if I put my political analyst hat on, of course, during a leadership race, the candidates are going to tack more towards the membership to the left.
Right.
And we know that the membership of the party is more left-wing than the average voter. And so, yes, they're going to trot out all of these crazy ideas to try and win votes during the leadership race. The reality is, when the NDP were government, to take rent control as an example, there was pressure from the left to implement rent control when the NDP was government.
And they never
did.
Rachel
Notley and her cabinet studied the issue and realized, no, this is actually an insane idea. This would be terrible. Even almost 99% of left-wing economists agree that this is a dreadful idea, never mind conservative or right-wing economists. And so they didn't actually do it. So the reality is, when you're government, there's a bit of a moderating force there in that, you can't actually be insane when you're government. You can only get away with being insane when you're opposition, right?
Right.
So, everything is relative. And a lot of the ideas that are going to get thrown out when you're in opposition are not going to see the light of day if and when you ever become government. That's just the reality. So that's one thing to consider. With regards to Naheed Nenshi, it's an interesting one because everyone's saying, "Oh, I've never seen him as a partisan person or an orange NDP or something like that." It really all depends, right? Like, if you look at the policies and the way that the Calgary Council was run under his tenure, if anything, you could argue he was far more left wing than the NDP, because he was mayor while the NDP were in government, and it was often Naheed Nenshi pushing the NDP to change the rules to allow him to do more left-wing ideas at city council. He wanted to be able to run deficits. He wanted to be able to introduce more city-specific taxes, and he really pushed the provincial government to introduce changes to the Municipal Government Act and city charters that would give him and the city council more powers to implement more of those ideas. And in some of those areas, he was successful in convincing them to do so, and in some he wasn't. Another example would be the Calgary Olympics 2026. He was all gung-ho on spending $5, $6, $7, whatever billion the end cost would have been. And in the end, it was Rachel Notley who stepped in and was like, "No, you guys are crazy. This is an insane amount of money, and we won't give you provincial money towards this Olympics campaign unless you hold a referendum and show that Calgarians actually want this." And guess what? We had a referendum, and then she lost that vote, and he didn't get his way, and the Olympics idea got killed because people were like, "We can't afford this."
Right.
So again, I don't want to sound completely crazy here, but actually it was Rachel Notley that stepped in and saved Calgary taxpayers $5, $6, $7 billion by requiring that referendum. So, Nenshi has always claimed to be purple. He's always claimed that, that's some kind of centrist moderation of blue and red, and that he's, really a nonpartisan person. But if you judge on policies, I don't see him having any issue fitting in with the NDP. And a lot of people are saying, "Oh, it's kind of an NDP takeover. His moderate centrist people are going to come in and take over the NDP." But in reality, we just have this quirk where, there hasn't been a Liberal Party in Alberta for a long time. The Alberta Party was never really a thing.
No.
I'm sure he would prefer, from a branding perspective, if the Alberta Party or the Liberal Party was more of a force in Alberta, and he could lead the Alberta or the Liberal Party and continue claiming to be a centrist moderate. That fits with his branding style. But the reality is that the UCP and the NDP are now the only two games in town. And, I don't see any issue with him fitting into an NDP party promoting tax increases and spending increases and all sorts of, more attacks on the private sector.
Yeah, 60% tax increase in Calgary while he was in charge. That's an NDP policy if there ever was one. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, 60% plus for individuals, for homeowners over the time that he was in power. But if you were a business owner, some of the businesses were looking at way more than that. You know, there's examples that you can find of businesses paying 5, 6, 700% more. You know, just absolutely massive increases. And this is really interesting because I think this will be the one challenge that it'll have, which is that there's a quirk of how municipal governments work in Alberta and in other places, which is that they're not allowed to run deficits.
Right.
So side note, I've seen some of Nenshi's supporters claiming that he's a fiscal conservative because he never ran a deficit. No, he never ran a deficit because he legally was not allowed to run a deficit. He absolutely would have run deficits had he been allowed to. But because municipalities legally aren't allowed to run deficits, the way that they work is that they first calculate how much they want to spend. And then they change their tax rate to make sure that they generate enough money to cover how much they want to spend. And so, you know, that's why in provincial government, we have tax rates. And depending on how strong the economy is, that determines how much money the government generates. And it's a big deal in provincial politics if you want to go in and you want to raise taxes, right? The NDP proposed a 2% increase in the corporate tax rate and basically no personal income tax increases. And that really hurt them in the election campaign because people really didn't want even just a small tax increase at the provincial level. Yet Nenshi is used to being able to do 6, 8, 10 massive 10% tax increases year over year over year over year because he's used to picking how much he wants to spend first and then figuring out what the tax rate should be to collect that amount of money later. Guess what? You can't do that at the provincial level. He's not going to be able to lead an NDP that comes in and says, well, we want to spend X amount and we're just going to raise taxes to whatever they need to be able to collect enough money to spend that, because it just doesn't work that way provincially. So that's the first challenge he's going to have if he becomes NDP leader, is like actually running a budget. You're going to have to actually prioritize spending. Whereas at council, he was used to just throwing money at every single problem and then just collecting extra tax to pay for it. And that's how he was balancing the budget at City Hall. So that's I think, going to be the first challenge he has to face. Now,
I'm going to ask you to speculate. What are his chances of winning? Because I think if he does win, it's a game changer. I think in Calgary, I think also in Edmonton. And I hate to even think of it, but what do you think his chances are? Given that he's coming from the outside, Sarah Hoffman, as much as I disagree with her on literally everything, has been grinding it out for her spot to take over from Rachel Notley since she was elected back in 2015. You know, what are his chances of being accepted by the party membership?
Well, there's two parts to this. This first, can he win the leadership race? And then can he win an election? So let's talk about the leadership race first. Honestly, I think the leadership race is over. I think the name recognition and the campaign organization of all the other candidates running is nothing compared to what Naheed Nenshi is. You know, putting aside the policy of what he pursued at City Hall, he's a very smart guy, very competent, has a really good campaign, professional campaign team behind him that have won multiple elections, both for him and for the NDP. This is another reason why I think he's a perfectly fine fit for the NDP, by the way. Pretty much all of his campaign team from his mayoral runs were the campaign team for the NDP. It's the same people, it's the same consultants, it's the same businesses and contractors. So the idea that he's some kind of outsider to the NDP, no, we know, for example, well, we don't know, but we pretty much know, for example, that a lot of Nenshi's people were heavily involved in the process for writing the leadership rules for the NDP, because they're high-level senior NDP people who were involved in that process. And that's a big part of why the rules are written in a way that is quite open to outsiders. You know, the NDP, the NDP have a clause in their constitution that allows the unions to have up to 25% of the delegate votes in a leadership race. And yet for this leadership race, the unions get 0. And the NDP could have written much stricter rules on the ability to sign up members, which would make it easier for insiders to run and more difficult for outsiders like Nenshi to run. And yet they didn't. They wrote the rules in a way that actually it's quite easy for an outsider to sign up a lot of members. So we know that Nenshi has been considering this for a while. We know that a lot of his senior supporters and campaign team were involved in the process for writing the rules and made sure that they got a rule set that would work for Nenshi coming in from the outside. The other thing is, from his time as mayor and from his time involved in politics, he doesn't just have a lot of name recognition. He also has a massive database of supporters.
Right.
One of the benefits of being a mayor is that you're an independent and you control all of your own data. All of his email list, all of his supporters, all of his volunteers, they're all his. They're not party data. So the other candidates are trying to appeal to existing volunteers and donors and supporters of the NDP.
They don't have
whereas
access.
Naheed Nenshi has his own massive list of supporters that he's been building for years and years and years. So I think he's going to come in. I think he's going to sign up a ton of people as members of the NDP from the outside. I also think he's probably going to do quite well with the existing membership of the NDP. I think if the NDP had set rules that had much more restrictive regulations for signing up new members, it would have been more difficult for him.
Mm-hmm.
But I would not be surprised if he ends up getting a majority of the existing NDP support as well. So that's the first thing. That's the leadership race. I think it's over. Just look at Twitter. His first campaign event, hundreds of volunteers showed up to help out, pretty much spur of the moment, because they're excited by his campaign. I don't know how the other campaigns, teams, volunteers, events are going and things like that, but I haven't seen a lot of photos of a lot of events on social media, which suggests to me that it's not going too well. Because if they were going really well and they were having huge audiences, they'd be posting those photos.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think the leadership race is over.